What happens when a third generation agricultural leader decides to challenge the status quo and build the machinery, markets, and policy needed to bring a once forbidden crop into the modern farming economy? Welcome to Industry Ignited, the podcast where we explore the leaders, ideas, and innovations transforming how the world grows, builds, and powers. What's next? I'm your host, Dr. Leanne Aguilar. And today I'm talking with Andrew Bish, CEO of Bish Enterprises and Hemp Harvest Works, and president of the Hemp Feed Coalition. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me today. I'm glad to be here, Leanne.
Thank you for joining me again. Yeah, so you grew up around a family ag business, left for college, then came back to lead in ag manufacturing and hemp. When you look back, what were the key turning points that pulled you back into agriculture?
Looking back on that, I think it's community. I always wanted to be more involved in my community that I grew up in. When I was younger, I actually wanted to be involved more heavily into politics, which I ended up being involved in just in a different capacity than what I had envisioned. But it's the community. I appreciate being from a small town where people know each other. It's a different environment. I like cities, but I also really enjoy being a part of this unique small community that we have here in Giltner, Nebraska.
Awesome. Okay, so just the community and coming back to the town that you knew and loved. Are you in the same place where you grew up, in the same community?
Yeah, absolutely. Town of 400 people, little tiny town. I wasn't born here. I was born in the southeast part of the country near my mother's parents, near Nebraska City. We moved here when I was young. I graduated from Giltner High School, went off, saw a lot of the world, came back, and after living in the big city, lived in Springfield, Missouri, Kansas City, Kansas, and Omaha, decided to come back to the small rural community. You know, we had a child at the time, our daughter Eliana, and wanted a nice place to be able to raise her. And having her class size, she's got less than 20 people in her class, and that was a good opportunity for us to come home.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, when you have kids, everything changes, right?
If you do it right, things change.
Yeah. Now, you've said you didn't actually enjoy the family business as a kid. What changed your mindset about it as an adult? And what did 12 years at Radio Shack teach you about customers, innovation, or leadership that you brought home to Bish Enterprises?
This is an excellent question. I think the biggest thing that changed was just perspective. When I was here, when I was young, everything was old hat. It is what I was used to. There wasn't anything to compare it against. It's all I knew. And so looking back at that, I guess I probably, like many people, don't realize what they have until they don't have it anymore. And I went away to work at Radio Shack, and I loved working with that company. I was able to take a number of different leadership courses, and my career really excelled with that organization. Being able to work directly, hands-on with customers, being able to train people that were working with our customers. I really enjoyed that. Some of the things that I was able to look at from Radio Shack and the corporate perspective was, how do they run a large company? What are the things that make it tick? What are the things that work really well? But also be able to experience the things that didn't work as well. And so when I come home, I'm able to look at that and say, look, these things work really well, and these other things over here I didn't enjoy. Let's not incorporate these aspects of the business that weren't good for the people, weren't necessarily good for the business, but were traits of the different leaders. So I always looked at the different leaders that I worked under, because I worked under a lot of different leaders, and I developed the philosophy of take the good, leave the bad. And as I came back home, that's exactly what I did.
Awesome. Yeah. So you were just able to, I guess, gain perspective by learning from the leaders that you worked with at Radio Shack. And then, like you said, take the good, leave the bad, and then grow from there.
Yeah. And some of the best leadership actually was poor leaders. They teach you what you don't want. They help you understand the other side of the coin. So I'm grateful to all of them, good or bad. Obviously, the good ones I appreciate a little bit more than some
Right.
of the bad ones, but I wouldn't have learned what I learned without both sides of that.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, what was your biggest takeaway from a poor leader?
Short-term management results through hostile action. Corporate America's wonderful for that. There's a lot of quick wins that corporate America sometimes wants to get, and they sometimes come at the expense of the team members. I was able to look at that and see how do we get longer, sustainable results, which is what ultimately drove my career versus operating on those quick wins. Now, that sometimes got me in some hot water when people wanted me to move extremely quickly, but I always was looking at the bigger picture. At the end of the year, they're going to challenge me on profitability, and
Right.
those numbers I was always able to stand by. So I just let the noise be the noise and deliver on the areas that I knew that we could deliver on.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Now, your grandfather founded Bish Enterprises in the 1970s, and now you're steering the next chapter. How do you balance honoring the legacy with pushing into new, sometimes controversial territory like hemp?
Yeah, so I actually don't even look at it that way. My grandfather, interestingly enough, I went to his 96th birthday party on this Sunday. So I got to see him, talk to him about, things that a lot of things I already knew, right? He's 96 years old. I spent a lot of time with him. I just look at agriculture, the different parts of agriculture, as problems that need to be solved. So, yeah, hemp is controversial, but I look at it much more from the standpoint of trying to help a farmer, which I think is
Hmm.
how my grandfather always looked at it. To me, it's just a different crop. I think society tells us sometimes that things are supposed to be a particular way. I've always been good at ignoring what society says about things and try to stick to my values, what I believe in. And when it comes to hemp, that's very much how I looked at it. It didn't even doesn't even occur to me most of the time that hemp is special in any regard when I'm working with a customer. It's just
Right.
a crop that needs to feed into a machine, and my responsibility is to figure out how to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And you're right. It is the society a lot of times that it's creating the noise and judgments and spinning the tales around, and it's not always necessarily true. So now you've built a career around niche crops and specialized equipment rather than chasing the mainstream corn soybean lane. What drew you to the weird problems in ag instead of the safe traditional path?
I like problems. I don't like to do what everyone else is doing. I've been that way since I've been young. I've always tried to carve out my own path, my own road. And what I think is interesting are these unique challenges that exist with these niche crops that people aren't exploring. Corn is important to the United States and to our farmers, especially locally. So are soybeans. But I think the corn problems are boring. I think they're too simplistic. We're chasing pennies now with a lot of those commodities. And I really like to get into some of these more nuanced problems that people have never considered and being part of the solution. So that's really what drives me is I'm always looking for a new problem to solve. And there's a lot of them in niche crops. They have been solved already with corn and soybeans.
Right. I hear that a lot from leaders. Yeah, it's just they're being problem solvers, you know, liking or enjoying the challenge of solving new problems. And that's what innovation is, really. It's being
Yeah,
able
you
to
have
solve
to
problems.
you have to really enjoy problem solving to innovate because that's what you have is you have a series of problems and you have to look at life in a way that your job is to overcome the challenges that are in front of you. And if you look at it that way and enjoy it, then it can be a lot of fun. At the same time, if you look at problems as obstacles that can't be overcome, obviously this is probably not a great space for you to work in being an innovator.
Yeah, right. And for listeners who aren't living around combines and headers every day, how do you explain what Bish Enterprises actually does and why that 3 foot space in front of the combine matters so much?
Yeah, that's actually really challenging. That's something I struggle with consistently. What do we do? And the way that I describe it is, again, we're always focused on unique problems, specializing in the front of the combine forward. So, what does that mean? Our specialty is in crop feeding. And why does that matter? Well, crop feeding applies directly to efficiency. So the amount of material you can feed into a particular machine in a number of hours directly correlates to profitability. The more material you can bring in with the lowest amount of loss means that you're going to have a higher profitability for that particular customer. And that's what we're always targeting is how do we make sure that we help this customer remain profitable or be more profitable rather than they were before we met them, because ultimately the goal is to improve, and that's what we're trying to do there. So
Yeah.
that's why the first the first part of that combine is so important. I mean, all of it's important, right? I mean, you can't get away with one part and not the other part. But the reason that we have spent our time in that particular area is because we're good at it. And again, there's not a lot of places that have been hyper focused on that area of agriculture.
So that for the front part of combine is the part that's actually distributing the feed. Is that correct?
Well, so that's where the crops are coming in. And that's the first line really is when a machine enters the field, it's got to go through what they call a header
Uh-huh.
and then feed into the combine. If there's any problems in that little space right there, that's going to slow the entire operation down, make the rest of the operation less efficient, and create a lot of challenges that result in unprofitable customer.
Okay. Now you've helped develop solutions for crops like wild rice, sorghum, hops, and hemp. Can you walk us through a real example where a farmer came to you with a problem and how your team engineered a practical solution?
Yeah, a few years ago, we had a customer, and one of the crops that they harvest, a niche crop, was a type of grass. This is grass that you're going to use in your yard. This particular type of grass was called ryegrass. Now, it's not rye; it's a grass called ryegrass, and this particular crop is unique in which that it has a very low amount of biomass. And because of this low amount of biomass, when he was bringing the material into the combine wasn't staying full. Now, for people that aren't familiar with combines, the question would be like, why does that matter? Well, the reason it matters is because combines are geared towards being full, and so they're most efficient when they are 80% full of material. Ryegrass would only satisfy about 50% of the combine load, so the combine wasn't achieving enough load to properly process that material. What that means is they had a lot of loss coming out of the back of the combine because there
Oh,
wasn't enough material coming in. So
okay.
they said, look, we need to be able to bring in more material, but we can't make the material that we bring in. There's just no way to bring in more biomass than we already have. So what did we do? We looked at what our options were. And in order to bring in more biomass, we needed to bring in an additional windrow. So currently they were bringing in one windrow of material. And to get to a more full capacity, we identified a way that we could build a larger piece of equipment, a larger header
Hmm.
that would bring in two of those windrows. And then the customer was consistently bringing in 90% plus of the combine load into the combine. The overall efficiency improved for that customer. So not only were they able to harvest twice as fast, but their
Wow.
efficiency went up by about 20% in addition to that speed.
Hmm. And a lot less waste as
Yes.
well. Yeah. Now, in many cases, your equipment has to be serviceable in rural communities with farmers finding parts locally. How does that constraint shape your design philosophy and the way you think about durability, maintenance, and innovation?
Well, I appreciate constraints. I know a lot of people, when you think about how to innovate, you think you'd want a world in which that you don't have a lot of constraints, but that means that you have unlimited possibilities, and that's challenging. When we have constraints, such as using different pieces or components that we know that a customer can be able to source easily, it gives us some framework to design around. It helps encourage us to build a particular way. That means we can't do everything, but that also means we don't get hung up on how do we do everything because we end up limiting ourselves. So I think limitations are actually good, especially when you're trying to be creative, you're trying to come up with solutions. Being able to have some rigid fixed items that you have to work around can actually help inspire you to make a better product.
Right. They're kind of like the guardrails that keep you going in certain directions. So you're not just everywhere, but you're more
Absolutely. I mean,
focused.
even if you look at many of the great works of art, all the way back to Michelangelo, Leonardo, those gentlemen, they had constraints. They had a budget that they had to work with. They
Right.
had certain types of paint that they had to work with, and all of those different materials that they had, the budgets that they had, the time and place that they were in, caused them to develop works that lent themselves to those constraints.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense how constraints drive innovation. They force you to come up with solutions for those specific problems. Now, not long ago, one of your products was recognized among the coolest things made in Nebraska. In a sector that's often seen as traditional, what does cool innovation look like in ag manufacturing, and where do you see the next big gains coming from?
Well, cool is definitely relative. And I know this because I have a 17-year-old daughter, and I talk to her about some of the things that I think are cool, and she just stares at me and obviously does not think they're as cool as I do. So, what's cool? What's cool is a product that helps solve the need of a particular customer. These people are trying to feed their family. Every farmer that I come across is somebody that's working to feed themselves, feed their family, and then help feed the world. And so, if we can plug into that and solve even a small challenge that particular person has, or more than one person has, that's when it gets exciting. When you can solve problems for multiple people,
Yeah.
you're really being a part of the solution, not just existing, not just being a part in the world, but you're making the world a better place. So I think cool looks like anything that makes the world a better place, even if it's a very small bit of something.
Okay. Yeah, just making an impact and just helping other people and improving life for multiple people.
Yeah,
I like that.
absolutely. That's what gets me up in the morning is I have a unique opportunity to be able to go out, find problems, solve these problems, and then make somebody's life better by doing that. And not everybody gets to get up and do that type of thing.
Yeah, awesome. So, real life hero. I love that. Now, you're president of the Hemp Feed Coalition, working to gain federal approval for hemp as animal feed. Why is that such a critical missing link for farmers? And what changes when hemp grain and meal can be fed at scale?
Well, if you look at agriculture and commodity agriculture in the United States, we've really trained our farmers to be heavily chemical dependent. And because of that chemical dependence, they've been able to do things that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise, which has promoted a very small amount of rotational crop opportunities for farmers. The reality is, farmers have a limited window of mileage that they can deliver a crop before it becomes unprofitable. Because of the amount of chemicals that we've used, we've eliminated a lot of distribution points for niche crops throughout the Midwest, where a lot of grain elevators today only take corn, only take soybeans, or both. Some of these will take wheat, but not all of them. And so, what's the solution to reducing some of that chemical dependence? Well, you have to understand why we have the chemical dependence. When you have a low rotational cycle, so you're only using one crop or two crops, one crop we call a monoculture, you have to feed that crop a lot of different items in order to live. You have to increase the amount of pest control that you're supplying to that. You have to increase the amount of fertilizer because it's not getting nutrients from a crop that normally would be there. Those pests are there, by the way, because since that same crop is there year after year after year, they can grow and develop because some pests are attracted to some crops and not to others. So the more you rotate, the less of that you have.
Mm.
Hemp, if we are able to introduce hemp into this rotation, you move from a two crop rotation, which is what many of the Midwestern farmers are dealt with. And I say dealt with because, again, they have limited access points to distribute their goods. They can't just go anywhere and be profitable.
Right.
So if you're able to introduce a third commodity into that structure, now you're going to reduce the amount of input cost for that crop. So you may not have to use as much pesticide, as much herbicide, because the pest pressure is going to decline. The weed pressure is going to decline. Because of a proper rotation, you may not need to add the same type of fertilizer, or maybe it's a reduced amount of fertilizer that would go into that. So what I see is hemp is actually a vehicle to help move traditional agriculture into a more regenerative cycle where we do have those rotations. We do have healthier soils, cleaner soils as a result of the reduction in
Mhm.
chemical and fertilizer inputs.
Okay, interesting. Now, hemp, I know it's legal for human consumption, yet still really heavily restricted in animal feed. From your vantage point, what are the biggest regulatory and perception hurdles you're navigating with FDA and AFCO?
Yeah, I think it's the biggest regulatory hurdles are the perception. So the perception of hemp and it being confused often as marijuana leads people to this idea that feeding hemp to an animal will get that animal high. I know this because when I talk to people, that's the number one joke that I get from
Mm.
people. And people joke around about things that are true. So I hear this from people all the time. And because of that perception, the federal government has taken a stance against actually instigating some sort of regulation. And now part of this has to do with the fact that federally marijuana is not legal. So the lack of marijuana legalization is actually impacting hemp because hemp has some of the characteristics of marijuana. I mean, the reality is it's the same plant.
Right.
Varying degrees of THC or CBD or whatever cannabinoid that you want. And hemp has a very low amount of THC, but it is above zero. And anything above zero causes the federal government tremendous consternation because of their
Hmm.
inability to reschedule or legalize marijuana. So hemp falls into this weird regulatory gray area where the government says, look, we don't want to regulate one of these components, THC, because THC is not federally legal. But at the same time, because it is in proximity to hemp seeds, for instance, then it creates this artificial barrier. It makes it more difficult than necessary to receive federal approval.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Your coalition, I know, though, helped secure approval for hemp seed meal in layer hens, and you've completed studies on beef, cattle, and lamb. What have you learned from that research, both scientifically and politically, that surprised you?
The biggest thing is what I've learned from that research is all of the concerns that the federal government have that that people that are looking at food safety have are completely illegitimate. There is no legitimacy to the concerns about THC and THC being transferred from the plant to the seed, to the animal, and then to the person. There's no evidence that supports this. And that's why, going back to the previous question, we're not dealing completely with science. We have science that has data that supports the agenda that the Hemp Feed Coalition is pushing, which is hemp is safe and nutritional. And we're running into the perception of what hemp is. And sometimes that perception is overriding the science that supports its safety and efficacy.
Wow. So even though you have solid scientific evidence, it's still not being considered because of the perception, or it's being overridden by the perception.
Yeah, the perception causes the scientific data that we have to be looked at through a particular lens.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that must be frustrating. So how do you overcome that? What do you do to move things forward?
More evidence. That's what we keep doing. We keep supplying more and more evidence that proves out that the concerns are invalid.
Hmm.
By having that evidence, it makes it difficult for the level of scrutiny that is being provided to that aspect of the industry when we look at feed products. And that's one of the things that I'm excited about with the egg-laying chickens that we were able to see legal approval and achieved
Hmm.
is the more time that we see that product in the marketplace, the more obvious it will be that these concerns of people that fear that THC is going to be in our food are invalidated.
Right. So it'll just take some time, you think, just more evidence and time
Yeah,
before
I
they,
mean,
yeah.
honestly, there's some normalization that needs to occur in society. We got to keep in mind, whether I like it or not, there was nearly 70, 80 years of propaganda against this particular plant
Hmm.
for reasons that, a lot of people speculate on. But regardless of it, uh, there were multiple generations of people that were taught things that weren't necessarily true, and it's hard to unlearn something sometimes. As we see this
Right.
new generation of people becoming adults, people that are seemingly more health conscious. That's part of the reason we've seen some of this move towards hemp is because the evidence is almost overwhelming that hemp is safe and nutritious and good for humans and animals.
Yeah. You often talk about hemp as a rotational crop that helps clean soils, improves yields, and supports sustainability. Paint a picture for us. If the regulatory barriers fall, what does a hemp enabled farm system look like 10 years from now in the US?
Well, I think what it looks like is we see a lot more stability in the marketplace. We're going to continue. Look at the news that we have today. You can see that farmers all over the United States are suffering because of commodity prices being depressed. by having a third commodity, that's just going to give the farmers more options. So they'll be able to move to a different commodity that might have better price points. Also, if we take some of the acreage out, the corn acreage, the soybean acreage, the fact of the matter is the United States is growing more of these commodities than we can sell onto the world stage. So if we reduce some of that acreage, replace it with another commodity that is selling currently, it just gives that diversity to that farmer to be able to come up with a better farm plan.
Right.
So when they look at how they're going to plant their crops, you're going to end up with people that instead of being in a scenario where they have one or two options, now they have maybe three options. And anytime you can provide people with more options and they're educated, they're going to be able to make better decisions.
Mhm. Right, okay, so just more versatility, it gives them another option, like another way of, I guess, for cash flow, another
Yeah, I mean, just look at
stream
how
of revenue.
exactly. Look at the markets right now. Corn prices are extremely depressed.
Yeah.
Soy prices are extremely depressed. Hemp prices have actually been going up, which I'm not in favor of because it reduces the cost to the consumer, and hemp already has a consumer cost problem. But the reality is, if you gave a farmer an opportunity to make more per acre than what they're making right now, they'd take it. And
Mhm.
we need to be able to provide those opportunities. And I say we from a federal government standpoint because ag policy matters. The way that the government issues ag policy has a direct effect in terms of what we see in our fields and what we see
Right.
in the grocery store.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now you're juggling roles as CEO, founder, manufacturer, and nonprofit leader. How do you personally decide which risks to take in such a volatile space, especially when farmers are watching and depending on your guidance?
Yeah, that's a good question to ask, and it's a hard one to come up with what the answer is. I guess I have to look at what our time of development, what I perceive that to be, and whether or not I see that there's going to be enough revenue in the marketplace to support that. And sometimes we make the decision that we're going to move forward knowing that we might not have that revenue, but we're going to be impactful enough to help people that if we break even, then maybe it was worth it. Because what we learn from some products, we can oftentimes use in another product. But that's really what it comes down to is I have to look, I have to pull out the crystal ball. I have to make some guesses as to where I see the market going, what that runway looks like. And then another thing that can directly impact that is our level of support. So do we have
Mhm.
somebody that has the ability to need this now? Because if we do, oftentimes then we can get the funding to be able to support doing that and
Right.
push us forward. Now, if we don't, sometimes we look at what are some of the other opportunities. Nebraska is a good state because they actually have grants for companies that are developing products. And we've taken advantage of some of the prototype grants in the past to develop out a product that maybe we weren't sure if it was going to work out as well as we wanted to. And we're able to use some of the state funds to be able to support that. Fortunately, no matter what we make, that all goes into our intelligence bin and we're able to make better products in the future. So none of that money ever goes to waste.
Yeah, right. Now, are you working with farmers around the country, worldwide, or where do you kind of mostly?
Yeah, all over the country and worldwide. Not that Canada's that far away, but I was just in Canada in Winnipeg talking to farmers last week.
Uh-huh.
We've got machines in places like Australia and Europe. So we definitely do work worldwide. We got a lot of local customers too in the state of Nebraska. The bulk of our customer base, I would say, is outside of the state of Nebraska.
Oh,
So
okay. All
yeah,
over. Yeah.
over 80% of our products and our sales are going to go outside of the state of Nebraska. We'll probably see 10 to 15% of our products being sold internationally.
Okay, wow. So you're having to, I guess, learn and work with regulations and stuff in other countries, I guess, as well.
Oh,
And
yeah, absolutely. And as well as in the state, because, you go back to when we got involved in hemp to begin with, the states that we were working in, it was legal, but then I'd come home to a state where it was illegal. And
uh-huh.
so sometimes we had to learn how to, I shouldn't say sometimes, we had to learn how to navigate those regulatory barriers. And we're still doing that today. But whether it be hemp or other crops, just
Right.
understanding what those legal requirements are.
Yeah. Now, the hemp industry has seen hype cycles, crashes, and slow regulatory progress. What has those ups and downs taught you about resilience, pacing, growth, and keeping your team and farmers grounded in reality?
Well, I've definitely, as I've gotten older, learned more patience. I would say that I'm not a patient person. I'm considerably more patient than I used to be. I would say that I'm less quick to be confident that I'm going to solve a problem the first go round. I now really build in a failure cycle. I've really embraced failure as a way to succeed. And so now I try to build that into our actual plan. And then if we don't fail, then that expedites our progress. But if we do, then it's not a setback. So
Mm,
that's one of the big things that I've learned is plan for those failures into the master plan.
right.
It's great to think you're going to do everything well, but the reality is, if you can factor that in, that's a much more realistic viewpoint of where you're actually going to end up.
Okay. And with crops, what is a failure cycle? Is that an entire season or what does that look like?
Unfortunately, it's often an entire season, which is why it's so important that you don't end up going to the field with a known failure. So you try to dot your I's and cross your T's and think about things as best as you can, but also envision what things could go wrong and anticipate that so that you can possibly make those in season changes without having to completely miss the season. But it is
Right.
a very short window. Oftentimes the crops that we work with, we may only have 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks of time frame to do an entire year of testing. And
Wow.
if we miss it, we miss it. And so it's there's a lot of planning that goes
Right.
into making sure that we hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, wow. For younger leaders who care about regenerative agriculture, rural communities, and new crops, what advice would you give about where to plug in and how to build a career that's both innovative and rooted in real farmer impact?
Yeah, I think that what you have to do is just start doing something. I think oftentimes people, and I've had this to myself, get caught up in what I want to do. And I don't know that I always know what I want to do or what I want to do changes. So my advice is to find out what opportunities are in front of you and take them. And even if they're not exactly what you think that they're going to be, you'll learn something from that, and that'll shape your path. Really, what a young person needs to look at is what do they value? What is their value system? And try to find any type of role that aligns with that. If they do that, I'm sure that they'll be successful and they'll be happy in the work that they'll do. But if you could have asked me what things it is that I enjoy, they'd be far different from what I'm doing right now. But I don't think I would have been right, and I don't know that I would have been wrong, but you have to start doing something. So start somewhere. If you're not sure what to do something. Go
Yeah.
out and do something. Get involved, even in the tiniest way. It's going to cause you to meet somebody that knows somebody else that knows about a thing that you could do. And you just fall forward. Just
Hmm.
keep falling forward.
Right. Yeah. And I'm guessing, I mean, the world of agriculture, it's probably small when you think about networking and the people that you meet and who you know and that kind of thing. So getting plugged in somewhere, like you said, can potentially lead you to a lot of other opportunities and
Yeah, because
relationships.
even if you do things that you don't enjoy, you'll learn that you didn't enjoy them.
Right.
That's one of the things. Like when I was in high school, one of the jobs that I did, I worked on a hog farm, and I learned that I really enjoy working with hogs. I also learned that I would never own a hog.
Oh,
So there's no matter what you do, there's learning opportunities, and I think if anything, go at things with the right attitude.
hmm.
If you go at things with the right attitude, you'll course correct. You'll find your path. Don't be too hyper focused on where you think you'll end up. You'll be surprised where you end up if you go at things with the proper attitude.
Yeah, I hear that a lot too. You never know where you're going to end up. You think you're going to go in one direction and then life happens and you end up somewhere else and it's not a bad thing. But I think it's just that mindset and attitude of curiosity and always learning, growing and being willing to try new things and take opportunities even though you're not, you know, they weren't necessarily in the plan.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, thank you for taking the time to be with me today and taking us behind the scenes of agriculture innovation. For our listeners out there, where can they learn more about what you're up to?
Yeah, you can visit us, our company on the web. So if you're interested in Bish Enterprises, go to www.bishenterprise.com. hempfeed.com, not plural, singular. Uh, you can call us on the phone. There's an option to leave us a message. We'll call you back or we'll email you back, however you like to communicate. If you want to know more about the Hemp Feed Coalition, go to hempfeedcoalition.org. You can communicate with us there. We're real people. If you want to communicate with us on the phone, we'll talk to you on the phone. If you want to talk to us in person, we'll talk to you in person. That's how you can find us.
Great. Well, thank you again. And to everyone listening, if this conversation sparked ideas about the future of agriculture and sustainable crops, be sure to subscribe and share this episode with a friend in your network and join us for the next episode of Industry Ignited. Until next time, stay bold, stay curious, and keep igniting industry.
Well, thank you, Leanne. Thank you for allowing me to be here with you today.
All right. I enjoyed our conversation. Thank you, Andrew.